What is good, everybody? This is TAETRO. Today, we're going to be talking about a simple approach to live looping performance in Ableton Live. If you've been following along with my Ableton Live for Beginners series, this is going to be building on that. If you haven't checked that out yet, I highly recommend it so you have a strong foundational knowledge of Ableton Live. Today's video is going to be sponsored by Sonido, who makes this awesome pad controller, the Tempo Pad, that is really affordable and also has a fantastic editor that allows me to do some pretty cool things for live performance and custom mapping. But before we dive into talking about how to set up a live performance, let me show you what we can actually do. Alright, so that was a really fun live looping performance, and it's actually more simple than you might think to set this thing up. A lot of it comes down to the tempo pad and the ability we have to map different buttons to different functions and the editor that comes with the tempo pad. But regardless of what MIDI controller you have, I'm going to show you some techniques that we can use to set up a similar performance. So basically, this is an MPC style, I would say, performance in Ableton Live. And as you can see in the live session here, I have 4 different tracks. I have our 4th track here, which is a shaker loop. This is our timekeeper. It's what allows me to not listen to the metronome while I'm doing a performance, but still be able to keep time. I can hear the clear downbeat from this shaker, but it's also musical. And then we have 3 drum racks, and as you can see, they are all armed. And since we're working with a pad controller, I'm not using any keys or anything, but I've loaded up all of my samples into individual drum racks that serve different purposes for different sections of our song here. So starting with the first one, let's take a look at it. The first drum rack contains all my major drum instruments, cymbals, my effects, and our initial vocal chord sound with those little extra vocal things there. Those are all self-contained into one drum rack, and as you can see, I've color-coded each pad to let me know exactly what's on each individual pad. So yellow indicates those percussion, green indicates these like fun ambient percussion things, purple is of course our vocal chords, and then these little breathy one-shots get their own color as well. I'll talk about how to set this up in the editor in a moment, but I want you to also notice that all these other drum racks are also armed. So how is it that I'm able to play notes here and they're not sounding on drum rack 2 or drum rack 3? Well, each of these individual pad banks on the tempo pad are sending to a different MIDI channel. You can see that here, our input channel is set to channel 1. So pad bank 1 is going to be sending to channel 1. Pad bank 2 here is sending to channel 2. And you might have guessed it, when I switch to pad bank 3, we get MIDI channel 3 to our 3rd drum rack. Another color-coded drum rack, which includes one-shots of instruments, this vocal, and then some more percussive samples. And I can scroll through each one of those banks here on the tempo pad, going from drum rack 1 to drum rack 2, which contains one shots of an instrument, to drum rack 3, which is a collection of different instrument sounds. So this is made possible by Sonito's tempo pad editing software, which is really, really robust and makes it really easy to edit your banks to be exactly how you want them to be. Now, something you're going to notice here is that each one of my banks is starting on the same note, C2. But again, what we talked about before in sending each bank on a different MIDI channel is what allows us to arm all those drum racks at once. That is made possible by a really convenient feature in this editor called Auto Populate. Auto Populate allows you to set particular settings for entire banks rather than having to go through and edit each individual pad, 16 pads across the 3 banks. That would be a real pain. So as I pointed out, I have each pad starting at the same note, but if you'll notice, each bank, the channel parameter changes from 1 to 2 to 3 across all these pads. You will also see that my color differences are applied here. I can change what color each pad is in a given bank. That really helps me during performance so I know what each individual button does. And next, I want to talk about this pattern of buttons here and how they help the function of the performance. Back to Ableton Live. Now, I've custom MIDI mapped a lot in this session. I've custom mapped the play button, as well as the stop button, as well as the record button. And what you'll notice is I'm in MIDI arrangement overdub mode. So all I'll be able to do is add notes. I'm not gonna take any notes away. I'm not gonna erase what I've previously recorded just because I'm in record mode here. So while this performance is running, at any given point, I could just solo on top of it without actually recording, but the moment I want to be recording, I can toggle recording on, and you can see the notes entering in here, overdubbing on top of my previous idea. I can toggle recording off and it keeps going on. That's accomplished by using MIDI arrangement overdub and mapping our record button at the top in the transport. Now, these 2 skip buttons are navigational buttons that I don't really use, so I've mapped them to have very specific functions in this set. Let me solo our drums for a moment and show you that this particular button here will actually mute our kick. That's an easy way just to transform a live looping session, since I don't have the ability to go like make another clip without a kick or delete the kick. I want to be hands-free and just on the controller. So I can easily mute the kick. That's accomplished by opening up the drum rack and mapping this on and off here on the kick. Similarly, our next button over here, the next little navigational skip button, I have turning on and off a few other elements. One of those elements being our shaker. Shaker is turned off. But also a lot of our other top end percussion is turning off at the same time. So you can see the shaker turns off, as well as our closed hi-hat and snare. Turn those back on. Turn them off. So now if I fully take out the kick and that top end percussion, I can create a dramatic drop and bring everything back in just by turning things on and off. So the core function of this performance relies on me working in a 4-bar loop, looped in arrangement view, and continuously adding things. So let's watch along with the DAW, the first part of this performance. I'll do the vocal cords first. 3. Bring in some of those percussion effects. And now it's going to loop back around and I can bring in drums. But we're overdubbing. So now that comes back around, and at any moment I can switch pad banks. Now I'm going to be playing my keys instrument, but let's not record it. Let's turn recording off and let's just solo. So let me demonstrate and narrate over how this performance works in real time with the starting section of this performance. Let's run record. Here we go. I'm listening to the shaker for time, playing these chords, but also playing some of that percussion stuff. Now it's gonna loop back around and we can play drums. We're just overdubbing. Now it's going to continue to overdub and we're still in record mode, so I can toggle that off, switch my pad bank, and now I can play. This new instrument, which is not recording, I'm just doing a solo. Stop at any time. And so on and so forth. Switch to the next pad bank, choose when to record and when to just play. It's a lot of fun. You can do this with any MIDI controller. You just need to map something to your arrangement record, make sure you're in overdub mode, loop a region, and then get creative with how you're going to bring things in and out. Because once you have things in the MIDI clip, in this style, there's no real way to move on to another clip without adding in another controller or using other techniques. But this is really simple at first. So if you can at least take out your kick and your top end percussion, you can have an effect on your whole song and kind of create pseudo sections in that way. A couple quick effects that you saw during the performance. On the master channel, I have this performance effects rack, which contains some filters and some beat repeats. I've got a whole video on how to set up beat repeats. You all know what a filter is if you've watched my Ableton Live for Beginner series. But essentially, just like we have 3 different pad banks on the tempo pad, we have 3 different knob banks. So you only see 4 knobs, but we actually have access to 12. So as you can see, I'm able to dial in the low pass filter, bring in a high pass filter, and then do some beat repeats. And those are like SP404 style performance effects, essentially. Just another layer of improvisation on top of being able to play notes. The tempo pad is an excellent controller for this process because of the robustness of the editor. There is no Ableton Live specific control template for this tempo pad, but I'm able to use this editor to make the controller do exactly what I want it to do. For instance, our record button is in toggle mode, meaning I can toggle it on and it'll be in record mode. And then I can toggle it off and we're out of record mode. Versus if we were in momentary mode. So if I send that to my hardware, you see that I have to hold down this record button for it to be in record mode. We obviously don't want that. So we can switch that to toggle mode. Send it to the hardware. There we go. And like I referenced before, the knobs have banks and pages as well. You can use the auto-populate function for those knobs and buttons as well. The final thing is, in Ableton Live, when you're doing one of these sessions, you're not going to get the full timeline of your full performance. So you probably saw this audio recorder in the corner recording my session. That is because that's kind of the nature of this style and this setup of performance. You're not going to get the long timeline from your performance back. This is really specifically a live performance setup. It's not meant to be a way to studio record. That being said, you could do certain things like routing your tracks in a group to an audio track and recording everything internally in live, or using an external recorder like this one and just capturing your session as if there was an audience listening to your performance and they were just hearing it over time. It all gets printed to audio right here on my audio recorder. So like I said earlier, each one of these tracks is a drum rack. That doesn't mean you can't play notes, right? So in the pad bank, in the second pad bank, all these are just individual one-shots of single notes. I could just as easily put a MIDI track there and use another mode, like the chromatic mode on the tempo pad. on any MIDI instrument. And you can go octave up and down if you want, but obviously I'm controlling a drum rack, so that's not going to work for me here. Also, if these lights are seeming very bright for you, I can turn off the lights like this and have them only illuminate when pressed. Of course, holding down the mode button once more. We have the pads illuminated, turning off when I press them. Last couple things about the controller here. There is a note repeat and a tap tempo button, which can be really useful if you're going to use this with external gear because there's a MIDI out on the back. We've even got a USB-C port specifically for power if we're using it away from the computer. If you put together a cool looping performance, let me know, tag me on your socials, film a little video of you performing, and if you pick up one of these tempo pads, let me know in the comments as well. Would love to hear what you think about this style performance. If you have further questions, let me know. If I can do a future video on this style performance or different style performances, I would love to do that. Thank you so much to Sonito for sponsoring this video. Link to pick up one of these tempo pads in the description. Of course, when you support the sponsor, you support the channel. Really affordable, really great controller. Thank you all so much for watching. Shout out to my members. This has been TAETRO. Have a good one.